Hey guys, welcome to the DarshanTalks recording and podcast. On this podcast, we discuss life science, legal, and regulatory issues, especially in the context of medical affairs, clinical research, and promotional compliance. If you like these videos and podcasts, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You know you want to. This video and podcast is brought to you by the Kulkarni Law Firm. Reach out to the Kulkarni Law Firm for advice on PRC review, MRC review, developing SOPs, training, audit compliance, and more. Reach out to Darshan at kulkarnilawfirm.com or call me at 302-252-6959. Or you can just visit our website at DarshanTalks.com or visit the law firm website at kulkarnilawfirm.com. That's KULKARNI lawfirm.com. Hey guys, really excited. We get to have Brad Hightower with us again. Brad is the person who is generating the most amount of shenanigans online because everyone wants to, because he puts out the LinkedIn messages that makes every site go, yes, I identify with that problem, and why aren't sponsors fixing these issues? We've had Brad on once before, and it was a huge success. So I'm really excited to have him on. So before we get started, Brad Hightower, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Darshan. My name's Brad Hightower. The longer I do this, sort of the worse my elevator pitch gets. But essentially, I've worked at the site level for about 12 years now. Within the last 4 years, I broke off and essentially started my own company in which we provide research infrastructure to physicians who don't otherwise have access to it. So really from beginning to end, we provide a coordinator, take care of all the administrative and financial burden as well. And we do it at no cost. We split study income. So really the whole idea is to sort of make it as easy as possible for physicians to participate in clinical trials and really sort of lower the burden and the barrier of entry that exists, that I think sort of keeps the research industry so siloed. Aside from that, I'm sort of a general clinical trial loudmouth, and really again trying to bring side issues more into focus.
So it's interesting you identify as the as what you call it, the clinical trials loudmouth. Is that what you said?
Sure.
No, but I think that's important because it's bringing a voice. And don't get me wrong, we've had several people be individuals raising concerns that have been out there. I mean, both of us know Dan Safara. He's been doing this
Absolutely.
for over 10 years. But I think more voices are better. And these voices stress the problems that exist currently in the clinical research world. I mean, I know that we've been talking about standardizing contracts for a very, very long time. And that's been a huge issue in the clinical trials world because you spend an inordinate amount of time negotiating. Obviously, it's something I help with, but it's something that is just always a barrier you need to fight. So let's start from the beginning. So what we decided to do for those people who are tuning in is we landed up discussing 5 ways in which we can optimize engagement between sites and sponsors. And being the troublemaker that Brad is, he's been kind enough to volunteer to talk about these are issues of ire, and that can make those conversations between sponsors and sites a little bit easier, a little bit more flexible, and therefore result in a better, more productive relationship. So Brad, I'm going to let you take it off from there. Let's start from the top 5. What are they? And then we'll get into each one.
Sure. So, I mean, going kind of chronologically, I think there are issues between site and sponsor on, as early as feasibility. And as you already alluded to, sort of the budget process is a problem. I think SIVs and the methods in which they're conducted often create an issue. Actual protocol execution, and then lastly, just sort of general communication. I mean, I think these are all issues that, we've seen, the voices in the space talk about. They continue to be a problem. And really, again, to kick it off, I mean, starting off on the right foot with the feasibility process can make a huge difference. A lot of times you end up with, when a study's not enrolling well or site's not doing well, you've got site blaming sponsor and sponsor blaming site when really even starting as early as the feasibility process, there wasn't enough information for sites to make, good decisions as to whether or not a study is a good fit, and vice versa for the sponsor to decide whether or not a site is a good fit. So I really think we need to see more information being given to the sites during the feasibility process. Sometimes we have as little to go off of as, a brief protocol synopsis. So later, you don't find out, something comes back to bite you in the ass. You've given a, overestimate to the sponsor. You look bad. Site doesn't feel good about it. Sponsor's mad at the site. You end up in a very sort of tense situation.
Let's explore that a little bit, though, Brad. You talk about site feasibility. What is the ideal amount of information that you want before you're just drowning in information?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and I hate to say this, but it's almost as much as possible. I think we need to see full inclusion and exclusion criteria. We need to see a full schedule of assessments at the very least, because again, I can't tell you how many times you've had a exclusion come back to bite you that you just wasn't available to you before, or that without a full idea of what's required, via a schedule of assessments, you run into logistical issues that you couldn't foresee. So again, while even inclusion and exclusion may look good, it may be very tough logistically to do based off of, again, unforeseen factors. So I think at the very least you need these. I'd love to know who your vendors are. I'd love to know what your monitoring plan is. I think these are also important issues when it comes to determining whether that study is going to be a good fit for a site.
So would you suggest that this be something that's discussed, say, after a CDA? Or are you suggesting this is something that should be put on clinicaltrials.gov that everyone can look at right up front and know?
So that's, I think you're going a step beyond, which I love. I think it's probably a pipe dream because, clinicaltrials.gov is almost useless in a lot of ways. Again, you've got such limited information. It makes it tough. I can't imagine being a patient going through clinicaltrials.gov and trying to make sense of all of that. Ideally, I think it would fit in right after the CDA execution. After CDA, just at least give me as much information as you can so that we can make a good decision during the feasibility process. And then in a ideal world, probably years from now, I'd love to see all that be public, but I just won't hold my breath for that.
So now you're talking about site feasibility. You're talking about having this much information, access to the information. What do you say to the sponsors who go, that's all well and good, but you have to understand that from my perspective, you may not be part of my study. Giving you all this information is exposing myself to vulnerability. You're seeing my intellectual property. You're getting a lot of these details that you tomorrow can actually have a conversation with my competitor and share this information. What do you say to that?
I have to be completely honest. I've never even considered that to be a problem, but I guess it could well be. I think as a site, you're just trying to get patients in the door and keep the lights on. A lot of the times I've never considered selling information on the back end to a competitor, but maybe that's a whole different business model. But no, again, that's considering the sort of nature of the industry being, cover your ass. I could understand that being a concern, but in reality, again, I've never even considered that a possibility. So I don't know what that tells you.
Well, it's not so much. If I was a sponsor, I wouldn't be thinking about whether you would actively go out and sell. That would be all kinds of issues, right? Especially if it was done under a CDA. I'm thinking more an inadvertent disclosure. Oh, you're doing X, but sponsor Y is doing something is doing ABC. Why can't you do the same thing? We know those conversations are happening every single day, whether they're being had on LinkedIn or whether they're being had in just individual conversations. So I guess that would be an issue. The other issue I can think of is also just like the site is trying to understand what they're dealing with, the sponsor is dealing with trying to set up a full clinical trial, and they're doing this at multiple sites. So things are evolving as you talk. So I guess my question, if I was a sponsor, putting this onto ct.gov, putting this onto past the CDA, putting it onto some kind of a Dropbox or something like that where you can review it. I would think that I would look incredibly incompetent putting things on there and then changing that in 2 days and changing that again in 2 days over and over and over again. I mean, we all know we hate protocol amendments. We hate contract amendments because they just change everything we have to deal with. If you have to see, it's sort of like you're asking to see the backstage of a performance.
Sure.
And as a sponsor, I'm kind of going, I don't want to. I want to show you the play.
You don't want us to see how the sausage is made.
Exactly right. So what would your reaction to all of those things be? Is transparency still good, or do you just want to see the play?
No, for me, I still value the transparency because, again, I think you can at least, I think you can learn from that. You can learn, what changed, why that may have had an effect on you as a site. Hopefully a sponsor can learn the same thing so that they don't make the same mistakes, as they run their next trial. So, if anyone has seen any of my content, transparency is way, way up there on my list of values. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. Sites don't want to feel sort of rug pulled, when things change and they feel like they've committed to something. But I think you still end up with that. You just end up knowing less until it's too late. You know what I mean? So I feel like I'd rather just have that information available, even with the caveat that it's not finalized.
And I guess, but that raises that next question. I'm going to sort of jump right to the end and we'll come back. But one of the things you're going to talk about is this idea of communication, and transparency is a form of communication. And one of the big issues in the context of communication is either too little communication, which is what you're talking about here, or hyper communication. There's just way too much information. Can you please shut off that faucet? How do you balance? Isn't this turning that spigot of information way too far out, where you give me the entire spigot of knowledge of everything going on back door, and at some point you kind of go, I don't need to see everything. Just could you please stop communicating with me?
Yeah, and that's fair. That's probably a easier or tougher balance to strike, maybe. Excuse me, than I'm making it out to be. Because you're right. I think oftentimes a site feels over communicated with, or sort of left on an island sometimes. Frankly, right. I'd rather have the over communication in the beginning rather than rather ongoing. Because again, at least at that point, I've got enough to make the decision and really do due diligence. Rather than it's too late and now I'm getting harassed on a weekly basis, about screen logs or whatever the case may be. So, I think that could potentially help limit over communication later if we just get everything out in the open in the beginning. Does that sort of jive?
I know what you mean. I guess my next question associated with that same thing is, if you are engaged in a site feasibility analysis and you're seeing these constant communications back and forth because from that transparency viewpoint, as a sponsor, one of the things I might start thinking about, I might start worrying about, is the site going to think I'm completely incompetent and then not want to work with me? I mean, I can say that because I'm not representing a sponsor right now, so I can say these things. But just like you just pointed out earlier, it's how the sausage is made. And sometimes you don't want to see the super messy things that are going on. Like, let's put it bluntly, at the site level, you don't want the sponsor to come in there. I mean, every audit is sort of painful
Right.
From a site perspective. What you're really advocating for is a continuous audit, self-disclosure at the sponsor level, so I can see everything you're going through. And is that turning the camera lens too far? I'm asking.
Yeah, no, and there's probably some nuance here. Again, I don't need to know every single change or move, but again, I think especially in the beginning, more is better, because here's what happens. I mean, it gets turned around on the site later, and so when the sponsor comes back and says, "Well, you said here in your feasibility that you're going to enroll 10 patients, and you've only enrolled 2. What's the problem? You said this." And I've had sponsors do this before, and I've even said, "Listen, there's an exclusion criteria that we were not aware of at the time. It's made it much more difficult than we thought." And some sponsors simply don't care. That's, your fault as a site. You overcommitted. And I think, again, you could avoid a lot of tension and mistakes, and hopefully save some money by, going through choosing better, more appropriate sites, if that were more clear up front. So, I mean, to your point, look, I don't need to know every single little thing that's going through your minds. But I also think it helps the site understand the reasoning for why some of these things are happening. Well, if they were a little bit more transparent, and also sites won't feel sort of taken advantage of like a bait and switch. They'll say, okay, I can understand why this happened, and I can at least live with that.
Do you follow blockchain at all? Do you know like what the history of blockchain is and all that good stuff?
No,
Do you know what it is?
I know just enough to sound stupid. No, so I'd say no. I don't.
That's perfect. So we're both going to be stupid about this. So this is going to be excellent. So we're going to speak like two really intelligent, stupid people. It's like when I discuss things like global political policy, like global policy. I shouldn't be talking about global policy, but I'll have the conversation with you. So we're going to do exactly that. So in general, the way blockchain works is you have a block of information, you keep adding to it. You take that first block, you add a new piece. That's your new blockchain. You add another piece. That's the new blockchain, blah, 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 blah. So each addition creates a new block in that blockchain. What I hear you talking about is if I had transparency, I would know what's happening. I'm wondering if what you're advocating for, without saying this, is the use of things like blockchain, where if you have finished, you putting in a change in the protocol, you putting in a uploading it onto ct.gov, whatever it is, gets put onto the blockchain, and you simply get notified that there is a blockchain of information you can go look at. You don't need to see all the details in there, but you know that this information is happening in the background. That might be more information than you have right now, and that builds a certain level of trust. Is that the right direction?
I mean, that sounds, yes, and I hear where you're going with that. And I would, again, not knowing anything about blockchain and how it works. But yeah, my understanding, at least you've got sort of a auditable trail of what's going on and when and why. And I think to your point, which is really important, is that you begin to make sites feel more like partners versus, I don't even know what you would call them, employees or contractors. You know what I mean? So again, I do think that could go a long way towards any misunderstandings, because you can say, look, it's here, it's documented. Well, I mean, what else do you want? And it could also just help bring sites into the fold again, as feeling more like partners versus, sometimes enemies.
Fair enough. So I think we've beaten the feasibility horse to death. So let's take the next one, which is budget. Could you talk a little bit more about that now?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, there's a lot of sort of still antiquated practices when it comes to budgets. I think, things I've talked about at length are some things that need to go away. Things like withholding a percentage of the budget from a site until the study is completed, which is kind of whenever the sponsor says so. So, sites may be waiting for tens of thousands of dollars that have been withheld by the study sponsor, which, I mean, doesn't make you feel very good, to kind of go back to the idea of being a partner with the sponsor, that someone's withholding money thinking that, you're not going to fulfill your end of the contract. And then, big quarterly payments. Look, this is, again, another dinosaur that we have to get rid of. I mean, we have employees to pay. We have vendors to pay. I mean, sites are trying to run a business and being paid on a quarterly basis, if you're lucky. That's just what the contract says. Oftentimes you're looking at closer to, 5 months, 6 months sometimes waiting for these. I mean, you simply, we can't keep doing that and expecting sites to function well as businesses. And then, some other issues. I think screen fails need to be addressed better, because you start discouraging sites from screening patients. The other side of that argument is, sites will just screen patients to get paid, which I don't think is... Sure, there are probably instances of that happening, but I feel like that's an overblown fear. So again, those are just three quick things, but even the process, I think, needs to be changed. I mean, we're basically exchanging constant emails. It's so easy to get on an old version. It's so easy. Sponsors have sent old versions. So even just putting it somewhere where we can actually share a living document. Maybe we're going back to your idea of, more blockchain being sort of instituted within this process, but again, it's still feels like such an archaic way with so much room for error.
So I love it. To be full disclosure, I actually have a solution coming out that might help with this part of it. But let's. That was not the goal of this conversation. Let's talk a little bit about this. You spoke a little bit about withholding. The obvious, if I was the sponsor, if I was the attorney on the other side, and I'm repeating a lot of the conversation that other people may not have heard of. But you know what? How do I know that you're going to finish the work? Because once you've been paid, you have no incentive to finish the work, especially for like a site closeout. That becomes hugely problematic for us. You suddenly disappear. You don't want to pay attention. I need to make sure that my data is protected, my data is secure. How do you address that issue from a withholding perspective?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like it's tough to say. I don't know how to address it directly other than, look, these sites are beaten up all the time. There's monitors on site. I mean, again, I think there's got to be that trust, right? And I don't know necessarily how to quantify that, but I feel like, again, every site wants to do a good job. They want to get their stuff done and they want to complete. I mean, I don't know. Is that a real concern? Are sites just disappearing once they're paid?
Yeah, that's a real issue I've faced both on the site side and on the sponsor side, actually. But here's how I usually try to battle that. So I've been speaking primarily from the sponsor side. I represent all three sites, CROs and sponsors and SMOs, academic research organizations as well. But the response I usually have for something like this is, well, let's assume you're right. You shouldn't. I'm trusting you to make sure you give me the money. How do I know that you're going to give me the money at the appropriate time? We already know that payments are delayed. We already know that even when the payments come in, inevitably there's a glitch, and that's because the way you guys have structured payments don't always line up with the way the actual payments get paid out. So now I'm on the hook for delays in payments that I had nothing to do with. I've invoiced you for the costs. You're just putting that information back on me. You add in a 10% sort of buffer. I understand why you do it, but from my perspective, it makes it impossible to run a site because you're taking that budget away from me. The way we can address that is maybe having escrows, maybe by having a delay but not a complete withholding, and those might be some ideas you start throwing out.
Sure. Or I wonder if this is probably not a popular idea, maybe not even unpopular with myself, but I mean, if we take some of that startup cost and put it as the closeout so that there is a payment you're still looking forward to as part of your closeout. I mean, obviously they're not going to increase the budget overall, but maybe it's shifting, but it's not withholding 10% on an ongoing basis. You know what I mean? There's surely a balance there.
So yeah, I don't know if I'd necessarily agree to move my startup payments to the end. I understand why you suggested that.
I wouldn't want to either. Again, sort of, I feel like there's got to be some room there. But yeah, I wouldn't want to do that either, frankly.
So let's and then we get into screening fails. Everyone hates them. But the idea again, and just to be clear, we're really not going to be able to get to the other three right now. We'll do that as another recording that we'll have soon. But let's talk a little bit about screening fails. In the context of screening fails, your big issue is there are too many situations in which the site is on the hook for screening patients, whether or not and the information is inside the patient. So it's not like I can look at the patient and say that this patient qualifies or not. I have to go through the physical process of screening. But beyond a certain limit, you're putting that back onto me. And that's really difficult because you're going, how do I know that if this person has this genetic marker? There's no way for me to know that without running the genetic screening. But you aren't going to pay me to do those genetic screenings past 2 or 3 of them, depending on how many screen fails you'll allow. How is that fair? On the other hand, as you pointed out, the big issue is I know of sites who will basically go, you've given me a blank check. I'm going to just keep screening as many as I can because I know that the money is going to come in. I remember I've been negotiating these contracts when there used to be up to 10 screen fails. And now I'm seeing 1 and 2 and 3. So obviously people abuse the system for us to be where we are. But But talk to me a little bit further about what you were thinking of in terms of screen fails. I kind of feel like I took that over a little bit.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I mean, I don't know why you couldn't have a tiered structure where, maybe at certain intervals, you were re-examining why those screen fails are happening, and then you get approved for another amount. I understand it's going to require a little bit more management on the sponsor side, but I would think they would want that as well. They're going to start getting that feedback. So if you say, look, we're going to pay for 5 screen fails. Once you hit 5, we're going to have a meeting. We're going to take a dive and see why these patients have screen failed. If the sponsor feels comfortable that they were in good faith, open it up for the next 5. I mean, again, yes, that requires a little more ongoing management, but I think that you're going to get better information about and better insight into what's happening, and sites are going to feel not as motivated to stop screening after a while, because there comes a point where it's no longer financially feasible to continue screening patients, depending on how your screen fail cap is structured.
So the other way to structure that again might be by having a conversation with the sponsor and going, we will allow for this type. So you might break up that screening process into multiple components and say, and again, I've never seen this done, but I've always wondered why it couldn't be done. But let's say you were talking about this person needs to be have this disease state, this I'm making this up, height, weight, and age, have this serum creatinine, and have this genetic marker. Well, if I can get those first 3 of them in, I'm guaranteed a certain amount of money for the screening. You will still continue to pay for the genetic marker test because I have no way of controlling that. But I've never seen that done. It becomes, I don't want to be in a scenario as someone running a site to be at the whim of a sponsor on whether they're going to pay or not, because I've been in those scenarios and it's never fun. And if I was the sponsor, I'm not sure I necessarily want to be willy-nilly making those decisions. Sponsors, in my experience, sponsors do try to be as fair as possible. However, at the same time, I think that fair is always in the eye of the beholder. And what that means is the problem. As a site, everything's unfair. As a sponsor, everything's fair, and vice versa as well. So I think it's a interesting angle of sort of can screen fails be broken down more granularly? So maybe you don't need 19 inclusion criteria. If you do, maybe some of them are paid for, others are not. Sure. But that might be another way to tackle that same issue.
I think that would be, again, that would still be an improvement on what we see where, sometimes it's, 4 randomizations before they'll pay for a screen fail. I mean, there are studies where that's the case. And then again, if you screen fail 5 patients, then pretty soon you're like, well, at what point do I start shifting my efforts towards someone who's going to pay me for my work? And again, it happens all the time.
So do you talk to sponsors in those scenarios and try to sort of re-engage?
Well, we've gotten more aggressive with it. I think it's still a really mixed bag because again, there's just no standard. There's no standard, how these things are managed. So we try to get aggressive with, once we see something, again, if it had been disclosed during feasibility, maybe it wouldn't have been an issue. But once we, determine, well, this is causing all these screen fails, we didn't know that. We need to go back to the sponsor and renegotiate our screen caps, or, pull the plug and start focusing our attention elsewhere. So I'd recommend, certainly if you're a site, be more aggressive about it because it's we've seen some success there.
And then the last one that you talked about was quarterly payments. The obvious, I've been in scenarios where sponsors will negotiate that and they'll be like, quarterly payments is industry standard. My response always is, I don't care if it's industry standard. The fact is, there's no such thing as industry standard because everyone negotiates these things. If there was an industry standard, we'd have a template contract. There's no such thing because I've written template contracts. I actually landed up writing the one from Magi a long time ago. Like I think the current version is the one I helped with, but I can't remember what the current version is. But the point being, for quarterly payments, one of the things you start dealing with is this idea of if I'm the sponsor, I don't have the resources. I'm running multiple studies across multiple platforms, each having different inclusion exclusion criteria, different payment schedules, etc. You're asking me to disrupt everything I have to pay you, and that's a shifting of burden onto me, and that's not fair. That's not something I'm set up to do. My costs suddenly sort of skyrocket. That's not going to be feasible. If you can't do it, I'll just go to someone else who can. What is your response to something like that?
I mean, that's literally the job. You are contracting with sites and paying them for the data that they're collecting. So if you don't have it, get it together. I mean, I think it's becoming it's getting more to the point where sites are demanding it, which is, I think, very encouraging. And we're seeing a lot of less pushback when we say, we want monthly payments. You got to give us monthly payments. We're seeing less pushback. Now, again, there's still those that refuse it, but it's becoming almost just a given. If when we ask for it, they're gonna change it.
I was just involved in a situation where I had payments delayed by over 18 months. So some of it, I think one of the reasons you want to push for monthly payments outside the obvious, I want my money for the work I've done. Well, two reasons. Number one, if you did work on Jan 1st, you aren't going to bill for that until Jan 30th, which means that your payment is now not, work done on Jan 1st is not being paid for until Feb 28th, in the best case scenario.
Yeah, best case.
More likely, work done on Jan 1st under the quarterly payment system isn't being paid for till April 30th because you have the quarterly payments. Inevitably, you will always have, you didn't code this properly, or you didn't sort of chart this properly. We need delays. We're going to send back some more queries, and we're going to kind of go from there. And then that becomes delayed by multiple weeks, multiple months, and you're now landing with work done on Jan 1st, not being paid for till June, July, August. And that's the reality of the situation. Unfortunately, that, again, if I was the sponsor, my response would be, no. We have a professional CRO, some of the largest ones in the world, who are set up to handle exactly this problem. My experience often is that the bigger you are, the more decrepit your systems are, is my experience. But again, I'm not going to point to anyone individually. But that's been a lot of my experience, both from a sponsor perspective and from a site perspective. But I'd like to hear more about what your experience was.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's crazy. We do see exactly that. And it goes back to the whole idea of transparency. I mean, it's not always even clear to me what exactly is triggering a payment or holding a payment back. To your point, there may be something in the background with data management but we don't know that. No one's told us as a site. If they told us, we could fix it and we could get paid for it. But the silos that exist, I think, create a lot of issues. And again, we get payments all the time that have just no information what we're even being paid for. We do track it ourselves through our CTMS, but it can be incredibly tough to reconcile when the numbers don't add up to anything that makes any sense to you. So again, it's just completely mind-boggling. And I think it's yes, of course, that's a burden for the sponsor or CRO, but that's the whole business model. It's just like saying, like, I can't give you the data for the patient. Sorry, we're not. It's a burden on us. Well, that's what you contracted with us for, and that's why we're working with you, so that you will pay us in a timely manner. So it just doesn't feel that it's equal in terms of who can get away with what. Right? I can't get away with withholding data for 8 months, but they can get away without paying me for 8 months, and that just doesn't set things up to be a good partnership.
So here's where we are right now. We discussed feasibility. We discussed budget. We're going to come back and talk a little bit about SIV, protocol support, and communication. So before we continue, how can people reach you, Brad?
I'm super active on LinkedIn. Just Brad Hightower. My email is brad@hightowerclinical.com. You can always reach me even by phone. I'm at 405-831-5905. I'm always always pretty much open to talk shop, so feel free to reach out anytime.
Perfect. And just to be clear, we're gonna continue this conversation. So please stay tuned. We're gonna have Brad back on. These conversations are not intended to be legal, regulatory, or clinical advice and may not be right for you. These conversations are intended for educational purposes only. Conversations on this forum do not create an attorney-client relationship.